Javier Milei. Argentina elects right-wing populist Anarcho-Capitalist as president. Do you think he's going to start selling kids to fix Argentina's economy crisis? No, I think that he is a front. I think he's a front. That's what it is. I think that the right neoliberal party, which he needs in order to have any kind of, to secure any kind of power, is going to be seen as like the more moderate IMF defenders versus him, who is like the most insane. He's going to play the role of like the guy you focus on and talk about how fucking silly and crazy he is, while the country does what they need to do. Yeah, he'll play the heel. That's it. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know if it will change the dynamic of Argentina like dramatically.
The explosion is coming, they sang in triumph, and here it is. Javier Milei.
Are they playing ska? Is this the song that the guy was saying in the chat? Dude, there are so many memes, okay? There are so many memes already. This guy is crazy. Yeah, the people who view Milei as some outside crazy force and not just a continuation of neoliberal austerity capitalism has no political analytical skills. Yeah, it's kind of odd because like he obviously has like ridiculous things that he says that no one will allow him to do because like you still need stability. It's the Trump equation. Donald Trump comes in and he's this force, right? He's this like unshakable force, and people go, oh my God, this spells trouble for America. And it's like, what does he do? What are his most effective policy measures? One, he's just simply a continuation of the Republican Party. That's all it is. And maybe he doesn't have the same level of like restriction or restraint that like a regular institutional Republican would have, which does genuinely have harmful effects on the ground for people's lives and shit. But ultimately, he's crazy right wing on immigration. Donald Trump was, right? And he did like baby separation, which went a little too far so that like America had to triangulate. But beyond that, like Abraham Accords, Israel, Palestine, fucking out of control, nutty. Rips up the fucking Iran denuclearization agreement, out of control, nutty. Meanwhile, you know, what has the Biden administration done? Hasn't fixed any of that shit. Literally has continued along with that same trajectory. My point is, ultimately, Donald Trump was most successful when it came down to cutting taxes for the wealthy and gutting federal agencies, right? And that is all stuff that you would see under any effective Republican leadership, and maybe even some Democratic leaderships as well. Not to the same degree, of course. Federal agencies especially, Brandon has been very strong on. This is, in a way, very similar to that.
La situación de Argentina es crítica. Los cambios que nuestro país necesita son drásticos. No hay lugar para gradualismo. No hay lugar para la tibieza. No hay lugar para medias tintas.
With inflation at 140%, growing poverty, and the left-wing Peronists in power for 16 of the last 20 years, people voted for one thing, un cambio, a change.
Creo que esta vez la Argentina necesitaba un cambio.
A Javier Milei porque realmente
I like that you ask these motherfuckers, like, what do you think about the IMF? They will all say, fuck the IMF, horrible institution, it should be blown up. But then they go and they fucking vote over and over again for motherfuckers that have to, either by force or ideologically aligned, because they're ideologically aligned, with dudes who are going to follow the austerity measures and implement them. And this time they just directly voted for basically the greatest IMF leader that you could have put forward. Why can't we get a Milei but socialist? God, I'd love for the president of the left to say, hey, no half measures, let's do this shit. I mean, when that happens in Latin America, they get executed. So what do you mean? When you have a no half measures guy, they either get killed or they're completely blocked off from trade for the rest of the world. Or if you have a yes half measures, let's do social democracy please guy, Lula, he literally gets prosecuted falsely in one of the most corrupt countries. And like he gets thrown in prison for being like 3% corrupt, okay? In comparison to the 75% corruption that's happening. So there's no circumstance in which like someone can go, yeah, I'm going to legitimately save the country and implement nationalization and do good things for my people.
Milei brandished a chainsaw while campaigning to show how he plans to slash government spending and the state itself. One of his supporters even dressed as a chainsaw to reinforce the point.
A lot of people are covering this without realizing this is Chainsaw Man. Like, they don't know. They don't have enough anime knowledge.
He plans to abandon the peso for the dollar, but the central bank has no dollars and the country is deeply in debt. 4 years ago, before entering politics, he styled himself General Ancap, General Anarcho-Capitalist.
I think this is an embarrassment. I think you should shutter the doors and close it off. If you voted for a guy that did that, it's over. You're not a serious country. You can't ever be considered a serious country. We voted for Trump, and that was really embarrassing, right? Like, that was really, really embarrassing. But at least Trump didn't do motherfucking this, dude. If you say shit like, we had no other choice, you're a deeply unserious person with zero analytical skills. I mean, dude, you could have literally voted for the right neoliberal party, and even then, it would have been like, I guess, lesser evil voting. But like, it wouldn't be as embarrassing, you know what I mean? And it wouldn't be as bad, literally. This guy's, everything he said is bad. I mean, I read up a lot about him. I did not see a single thing where I was like, well, this is manageable. This makes him seem human.
During the campaign, he backed away from his proposal for an open market in human organs, but broke down in tears when accused of being a Nazi. He says he gets advice from his English Mastiffs, named after neoliberal economists and cloned from his dearly departed dog Conan. Some say he's barking mad.
He still talks to Conan, bro. He still gets advice from Conan. Dude, that's so sick. Yo, I'm sorry. This is like, we have not fully understood what the Cold War era forced neoliberalism did to Latin America. Because like, the impacts of that are still happening. You cannot fuck up an entire region like for years and years, for decades on end, and expect it not to have like every now and then have this kind of outcome. Bro, you're going, did we brick this guy? Look at him. What do you think? He is the most Reddit president you could have. This is a more Reddit president than fucking, what's his name, Bukele. He is more Reddit than the guy in El Salvador. Like, think about that. I thought, there's no way someone could be more Reddit than a guy who literally said, I'm going to turn my country into an NFT.
Dr. Christopher Sabatini is the Senior Research Fellow for Latin America at the Foreign Affairs think tank Chatham House. He joins us now from West London. Can he do what he says he wants to do? Can he really take a chainsaw to the health service and government departments and scrap the peso and bring in the dollar when nobody has any dollars?
Christian, it's a good question. There are a number of obstacles. The first one is that he only has a handful of deputies in the Chamber of Deputies and about 7 senators in the 72-seat Senate. So his ability to implement such radical changes is going to confront his limited political ballast, if you will, within the system, and he has no governors. First, there's that. The second is his economic ideas are truly untested. As your report mentioned.
Are they, though? I feel like that's copium in some ways, because like his economic ideals are, I guess, like the most neoliberal. Like it's neoliberalism on steroids, but like I wouldn't say they're fucking, I wouldn't say that they're untested. We've been implementing it slowly but surely everywhere. I mean, Chile is a great example of a place that forcibly implemented them. In many ways, I feel like this is the classic, like, real capitalism hasn't been tried copium. Hi, chat. Argentinian here is true. I'm truly saddened about the result of the elections. Not only Milei is a far-right libertarian, he's also a climate change denier. He vindicates the atrocities committed by the last dictatorship and wants to privatize our national oil company. It's really sad what is happening to our country. Love for you in chat. His competitor was a Hillary Clinton, basically. He was going to win law. Yeah. Oh, for those of you here, I'll give you the Oxford reference for Peronism. An ill-defined Argentinian political ideology known as justicialismo, which espouses Juan Perón's policies of social justice, economic nationalism, and international non-alignment. I wouldn't say it's like social democracy. I feel like it is a little bit different than social democracy, because there's right-wing components mixed into it. It remained strong within Argentina after Perón's departure in 1955, largely among the trade unions, which cherished the memory of the early years of his presidency. In May 1989, the Peronist Menem was elected president. Argentinian chatter here, I was just, from your stream, starting to appreciate the stuff we have here. Things like free healthcare, really good, and completely free universities, good public transport. Even with all our flaws, it felt like we were going in the right direction and we had a lot of potential, but turns out now it's Jover for us. I'm so fucking sad that this is such a setback. Not to mention all the dictatorship denial, like a German president denying the Holocaust. Yeah, this guy is crazy, man. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you other than, holy shit, he is literally like if you put one of my haters into a fucking lab and broke their brains further with like r/neoliberal and all the Ancap memes, you literally spit out this guy.
He's denounced the president of Brazil, Lula, as being a savage communist, which I guess is worse than just being a normal communist. He's also said that he wants to cut ties with China, which will be impossible given that China represents a large share of the markets for Argentine agricultural goods. He will find allies, and he's promised also to move the Argentine embassy to Jerusalem, much as his...
He said that's his first trip. That's his first act. That's like Juan Guaido. Remember when Juan Guaido was in fucking America and he was like, well, constitutionally speaking, I know that like I have this like window of power, right, in the Venezuelan constitution that would give me the opportunity to like change Venezuelan politics. And what will I do in that moment? Well, I'll just go to America and tell the American Congress that like I love Israel, and also I'm going to privatize our oil extraction industries. It's like, wow, thanks, man. That's super sick. I'm glad. That's really what people of Venezuela were like gonna vote for you on. That is what they want. That's what they wanted. Thank you. Other Argentinian chatter here. The Argentine left forcibly pushed the public to the right because it's ridden with corruption. I value Argentina's dedication to public infrastructure, but Kirchnerismo has constantly fucked everyone in the ass and could not be allowed to win again. Did you read up about the dictatorship? Put aside all the memes. People were tortured, killed, and disappeared by the state. It was mass genocide, I know, and have family members who were kidnapped. It's fucked up. Fuck people who say we didn't have a choice. The desaparecidos are the missing people, right? People that were disappeared, killed with no body to mourn by the last dictatorship. Yeah. Argentinian history is fucked, dude. Funny because Argentina was affected by Operation Condor, but this guy's just doing it for them, lol. Like, just ready for the selling of the entire industries. And of course, all these guys are funded, educated by the Atlas Network, Koch, Thiel, American think tanks. 100%. That's what I'm saying. That's what's the craziest part about this is that, like, look, I'm Turkish. I know very well what it looks like when you get a fucking neoliberal in power, a neoliberal populist in power. Except the difference here is that even in Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, when he was running, was like, fuck the IMF. How dare they? How dare they try to fucking control what we do to our own economy? Now, of course, when he did come into power, he privatized a bunch of key sectors. Of course he did that. He was the guy. He was the guy for the IMF, but he didn't run on it. This guy did. This guy literally did. He basically, without openly mentioning it, he basically was advocating for the policies that would be implemented, like the same exact policies that we implemented that have been implemented as a matter of fact. Milei said he didn't care about the IMF because he was going to have an even harder implementation than the one that the IMF was asking.
This is the Buenos Aires you don't see in postcards.
Slums like the Villa 2124 have long been bastions of support of the ruling Peronist party.
But with more than 40% of Argentines living in poverty, there is a new kid on the block
who doesn't look or speak like any other politician.
In the race to become Argentina's next president.
Yo filosóficamente soy anarco-capitalista. El Estado es el enemigo, es una organización criminal.
Milei's message is reaching voters fed up with the usual politics.
La gente está cagada de hambre acá. No es porque vivamos en una villa no tengamos hambre, no, sí hay hambre.
Walter fixes bicycles for a living, but still relies on government-funded free meals, water and electricity to survive. The sort of state intervention that Milei opposes and would like to cut. But Walter will vote for him anyway. He wants change.
Yo por mes estoy cobrando 60.000 pesos. No puedo comprarme calzado, ropa, porque la ropa está muy cara hoy en el día. La Argentina va para abajo.
For Walter, things can't get much worse.
Yo lo veo a Milei, digamos, una persona, digamos, ya que quiere cambiar la Argentina.
Javier Milei wants to upend the country's politics and promises to make Argentina great again.
Argentina, en 15 años, podría estar alcanzando niveles de vida similares a los que tiene Italia o Francia.
It's so funny when they talk about like Italy or France and like all of these places. Literally, if there's one universal value or one universal fact, every single nation that you look to as like beacons of prosperity, and I will include China on this as well now, right? As far as like economic development, have remained that way due to either not being colonized, or because, more importantly than that, because China was, right, having robust social safety nets. It's so fucking weird, man. It's such an odd thing. Like, the literal implementation of social democratic principles from like 100 fucking years ago have been carrying these goddamn countries right now as, you know, right-wing elements desperately try to dismantle what remains of the carcass of social democracy. Every one of these countries. So what blows my mind is like dudes going, yeah, what I'm going to do with Argentina is take a fucking chainsaw to all of our social spending. And that's how we're going to contain inflation. And that's how we're going to do it is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And then we're going to get to, you know, European social democracy levels of prosperity when, as far as I understand it, even in its most wealthiest time frame, Argentina has never actually had, while you know their GDP might have been great overall, they've never actually had even development. Even development is the name of the game here. Yeah, I actually did a study a few years ago. It's unironically rooted in the colonial Spanish caste system. The common argument is that Europeans can do that, but we cannot since they are rich and smart. Yeah, and if you're talking about the European caste structure, Argentina is quite literally, as far as I understand it, the most like European dick-riding country of all time in Latin America. There is a permanent aristocracy that has like a landlord aristocracy that has calcified in this country. And time again, all of the implementation, all of the policies have basically reconfirmed it in as it was developing and refusing to industrialize when other nations were unironically moving in that direction. Why do they refuse to industrialize? I mean, money. If you feel like your agricultural output is like enough for those in positions of power to make enough money, then why would you? Most of this tracks back to adjustment rates and IMF loans bankrupting every single country south of our border. This all comes from the IMF ensuring outside interests in the country, fucking them even more. Venezuela was the only one to starve it off, and look what happened there, CIA. Yeah. Yes, this is a really reductive and yet fairly sound way to describe it. People like to say Argentina was richer than the U.S., but it was a plantation/mine operation ruled by the old colonial rulers, Spaniards born in Latin America, where 10 people had all the money. And the needs of the working class and the peasants were like never met, which gives you, I think, an analytical framework to understand why something like Peronism took hold and became basically like a permanent cultural political force. Whoever even remotely does marginal improvements on the labor force and says that they're backing the labor force and the working class is going to become a legend.
Walter, back home with his dinner, doesn't care.
Sí, bueno, acá tengo luz, agua, sí. Aparte que tiene sus locuras, pero bueno, confío mucho en esa persona, digamos, ya. Que mi ley no pueden sacar, digamos, ya del...
I don't understand why a bunch of poor people will be like, fuck whatever safety nets we have. Brother, are you kidding me? First of all, America doesn't have fucking, and has, in contemporary American history, we've never had inflation anywhere near what these guys are experiencing. That's why I always joke whenever I talk about Turkey, because Argentina and Turkey, like, there's some parallels there. But even then, look to West Virginia. Plus 35 Trump state, dog. What do you mean? What do you mean? I understand why hog jet ski dealers want to vote for Trump and propaganda. Argentina doesn't even seem divided on it. No, there's plenty of poor people who love voting for Trump too. Poor people love voting for reactionary politicians who, you know, tell them like who feed them the gospel of change and prosperity. People don't recognize their class interests at all. And why should they, when a capitalist structure creates an information vacuum that forces you to never engage with politics from a materialist perspective, to never recognize your class interests. Just look at El Salvador, for example. The president is just jailing everyone with a tattoo saying crime went down and that's enough for people. Oh my God, I don't even want to talk about El Salvador, dude. That shit is nutty. Here is Progressive International saying, President-elect Javier Milei confirms that he will close Argentina's central bank, privatize state-owned energy company YPF, sell off all public broadcast networks, and travel to the U.S. and Israel before inauguration on the 10th of December. You are addressing Argentina's economic issues and woes, but you are not mentioning that starting today, steam won't take Argentine pesos any longer. That is the greatest tragedy. Well, there you go. Watch what happens with dollarization. Argentine gamers going to try to pay U.S. prices with Argentinian wages? I mean, that's why there is a secondary black market for everything in countries like this, in Turkey especially as well. There's no way that you can fucking buy video games with American prices, okay, with the American dollar when you're making Argentinian wages.
But inflation remained a persistent problem, and now it's at its highest in more than 30 years. There's no one reason for this, but a major problem is that the government spends more than it has. To keep up, it borrows or prints more money, which devalues a currency. This administration has tried a slew of policies to curb inflation, such as price controls, increasing salaries, and negotiating debt with foreign lenders. With the value of the peso plummeting, people are rushing to buy dollars. But the government limits who can make exchanges and how much they can get, creating a vast illegal market.
This is literally a mechanism of survival. I know this from, again, like I said, from my personal experience. You have to do this. There is no other way. There's no other way to survive in a country with 150% inflation. Like, people will just die.
The illegal market is so widespread that Santangelo says that some of his clients are police officers and government workers. He also says that arbolitos like him get fed the rate of the street dollar, directly from people inside the central bank.
Este es el grupo de difusión. Por aquí es que yo sé cuando sube y cuando baja. Es como alguien que está infiltrado adentro que...
He said, 360 is now at 1,000. I mean, dude, I know I always talk about how Flexicans are Turks, but this is the most Turkish thing I've ever seen. I mean, I don't think Turkey has like a secondary market for currency like this. It's kind of wild how many countries on the planet live like this. Everyone in the chat's like, oh, dude, this is so Iran coded. Oh, this is so Egypt. This is so Turkey. This is so Syria. Interesting to consider where all of these countries are where they are and what their history looks like. I mean, it's most of the fucking planet. All of it is like this specifically to prop up the few Western nations that benefit from unequal exchange in this regard. Let me guess, America bad? Brother, come on. I mean, no, actually, it's not America bad. These guys are just this way because they're, I guess, servile in their nature. They're just genetically inferior. It certainly has nothing to do with like direct intervention from the Western world, from Western capitalist forces. It has nothing to do with this and everything to do with that they're just like they're peasants. They're just like born to be peasants. They're inferior. Except with Argentina, they literally fucking did have kind of that mentality to a certain degree and brought in a lot of Europeans who came in. And yet, I guess they still weren't able to get out of that inferiority, the genetic inferiority of being in the Southern Hemisphere. It's a similar concept. You know this from domestic politics. If you literally have been following my coverage on Black Lives Matter or domestic policy in the United States of America and white supremacy and its influence, then you already know this. There are two ways out of this conversation. Either in the United States of America, when you look at domestic politics, you believe that there are some intrinsic factors as to why black people and brown people are just worse off. What is it? And if you believe that there is like an intrinsic factor, then you believe that they are genetically inferior somehow. You can mask it and say it's actually their culture. That's what it is, and not their race. But ultimately, it devolves into scientific racism. Or you believe that there are external factors like systemic racism, capitalism, purposefully keeping people down to create a permanent underclass, to literally have a newer version of slavery that is codified by our Constitution, that is perfectly legal and valid. And if you believe that, then you believe that there is systemic racism, right? And I believe that. I think that that is what's going on. Surely racism is responsible for hyperinflation. No, brother, that's not what I'm saying at all. You're misunderstanding my point. You either believe that like Argentina, Egypt, Syria, Turkey, Iran, all of these other countries that we just mentioned have dog shit economies due to the fact that they are due to some like intrinsic factors. Like they are just personally not smart enough in comparison to these beautiful European democracies that we look to. Or you believe that there are some other external forces at play. Their hyperinflation is directly related to the American currency dictating how they operate. So when America feels any squeeze, we push the weight off on the places like Argentina, Instead of stressing the American worker more, historically, we pushed it into the global south. Americans are feeling it now because it's so heavy. Yes, because it is destined to collapse. There's only so much squeezing you can do. If you are principled and you understand and you look at things from a dialectical materialist perspective, that same dialectic exists both domestically, and you can look at that domestic dialectic and infer things globally as well. Obviously, it's a bit reductive. There's a lot more reading that you must do to fully comprehend it, but it is the truth. It is the exact same thing. You can extrapolate this information by looking at your own personal experiences. Wouldn't a libertarian government allow an easier way for corruption to prosper? Not that it's a valid argument against socialism, I believe. Yes, of course. The only difference between a socialist government engaging in corruption, or a socialist government engaging in corruption, and a right-leaning government engaging in corruption is that one codifies the corruption, or at least like takes away the mechanism that is supposed to be engaging with corruption, the regulatory bodies that are supposed to say, no, you're corrupt, you can't do this. One basically says that they're going to combat corruption. Well, both of them say they're going to combat corruption, but like one actually will create some kind of some agencies that are tasked with dealing with it and then refuses to. The other one just says, oh, the best possible way forward is by not having such an agency at all, as a matter of fact, and just taking it off the fucking hinges. Exactly what happened here in Brazil. PT's government allowed corruption investigations to happen while Bolsonaro simply shut down any attempt to do so. I mean, here, let's look at this first. CNN Business wrote about immediately what could happen if Argentina really moved from the peso to the dollar, because that's what he's saying that he wants to do. Self-declared anarcho-capitalists who wielded the chainsaw on the campaign trail to symbolize his plan to cut state spending promised drastic reforms. I feel like the worst thing you can do in a country with hyperinflation and a tremendous amount of economic inequality and a tremendous amount of poverty is to literally eviscerate social spending. The model of decadence has come to an end and there's no going back, Milei declared. Yeah, decadence. It's like $15 for a chocolate bar, and this motherfucker's talking about decadence. Today, we end the destructive model of the ever-present state. It only benefits a few, while the majority of Argentina suffers, he added. The value of the currency has plunged 875% to the dollar over the past 5 years. Do you see the U.S. flooding his administration with money to promote capitalism? No. I mean, to a certain degree, maybe. But ultimately, here's what usually happens. One, we don't have enough runway to be able to do this because it's partially, like Argentina's problems partially come from our economy not being as hot either, because the entire world is used to us dominating the rest of the planet. And two, that rarely ever happens unless it's like a government-backed initiative. And in most circumstances, it's just a patchwork of private enterprise with their own personal interests in whatever sector they want to purchase in these countries, taking advantage of their crippled economy. That's why privatization of this sort is oftentimes very devastating. Because if you think that the American industry, American industrial leaders that do not care about their own citizens, care about Argentinian workers, well, you got another thing coming. Privatization of that sort always spells trouble. Think about your ISPs in the United States of America. Do you feel like they pay their workers well? Do you feel like they've upgraded their infrastructure in the past 30 years, even though they got billions and billions of dollars in fucking tax subsidies, or subsidies and also tax cuts specifically so that they could upgrade their infrastructure? No, they haven't done any of that shit. Now you understand how oligopolies operate in America, in the domestic market. Now understand that it's even worse in the international marketplace because they have no real interest or real reason. There's no pushback. There's no mechanism of pushback beyond the economic conditions worsening to a degree where there's literally like a peasant's revolution, a modern version of that. What's more, Jackson of Capital Economics expects the IMF to shift away from its recent leniency towards Argentina. It's not clear if a debt restructuring will be demanded at this point, but we are moving in that direction, he said. What that means for Argentina, for those of you who are trying to understand it in good terms, or in easy terms to understand, is they're going to say, no more free college, no more fucking free healthcare. We're coming in and we're cutting everything.
Argentinians took to the street of Buenos Aires on a wet afternoon to show their anger at a worsening crisis caused by economic policies imposed on them by the International Monetary Fund. The IMF, known in the Spanish-speaking world as FME, and the World Bank have a rich history of turning poor Global South nations into loan addicts. An over-reliance on loans means countries are perpetually in debt and unable to build self-sufficient economies that work for their people. Instead, their economic models are shaped by the IMF, who impose neoliberal free market policies in the name of restoring economic stability and growth.
When the IMF was formed in 1944, one of the goals of its founding charter was to promote human welfare. The charter looks like Disneyland. What's proposed there is beautiful, but in practical terms, it's doing exactly the opposite. Instead of promoting policies that create more jobs, it promotes budget cuts. Very basic stuff. Here's how the IMF works, okay? You go to a country that is impoverished. You go to a country that desperately needs to industrialize. Maybe they are a post-colonial nation that, for the first time ever, has like some semblance of political capital to expend. And they have natural resources. They have a robust labor force that you can utilize that is going to be much cheaper than the domestic labor force of Western countries. So what do? We go in and we give them money, okay? We give them insane conditions on these loans. We give them money and we go, hey, here's how you can use the money. And here's what you need to do to pay back the money. Now, of course, you go into this very poor country and you give them money so that they can industrialize. But who can they industrialize with? Well, they have to industrialize by utilizing Western nations because, one, they are usually the only countries that do actually have the techniques and the technology and the know-how of rapid industrialization. So you, in some instances, literally have to work with them, Western companies, that is. And also, in other circumstances, like they might literally tell you, no, you have to work with them. Okay, depending on what the conditions look like. So then you get this loan and you can't even recirculate the loan in your own country in the way that you would want to. You can't even use the loan in the way that you want to. You have to give the loan, or you have to take the loan and spend it back on the Western economy, Western corporations. So then you build up these factories, right? You build up the roads, you build up the factories, all in an effort so that your country, which has a fuck ton of natural resources, can be perfectly set for exploitation. Now you have a labor force that can go and work in a factory. Now you have a labor force that can work in the factory, if that is at all. If you're lucky enough to be able to depending on the material conditions in your country, like, and if it's a necessity, then they'll build the factory. If not, they won't even do that. But you can only work with Western corporations. So everyone that benefits from the IMF loans is in the West. You get a little bit of modernization with a shit ton of conditions. Now, so you start having to slowly but surely pay back those loans. How are you going to do that? The money is not circulating inside of the country. The money is not circulating inside of your labor force. Your labor force is already still working at the same domestic wage prices, and your material wealth, or the natural resources that you had, are directly benefiting through unequal exchange the Western world. So now you have all of this, let's say you have minerals, right? Rare minerals. Or let's say you have petroleum. You have oil refineries, and you're extracting oil, and you're in a lot of instances, the countries that built those refineries will then turn around and say, well, we have a 20-year contract, 30-year contract where you have to give us all this oil because we built the factory and you didn't know how to fucking take the oil out of the ground. So now you have to give us the oil personally. Or you can't really do anything with the, even if we let you have some of the oil that you're taking out of the ground, we are still going to tell you what you can do with that money. So they let you have a little bit of a crumb. The governments are oftentimes also very corrupt too, on top of everything else. And then, even if you have a little bit of a crumb of the wealth that you are now extracting, where does that wealth go back to? Well, that goes back to paying the fucking loans. It goes back to paying the loans, which you are not extracting enough to be able to genuinely pay the loans. So it's a double bind. None of the wealth on the ground actually ended up helping you. You got some shiny objects in the meantime, in the interim. But the reality was, it was just a way to formalize a newer colonial standard. All you've done at the end of the day is basically give your natural resources to the Western world so they can use it, while simultaneously trying to pay back these loans that you literally cannot. There's no way to pay back those loans at all. So then the IMF will come in and say, okay, we'll do debt restructuring, or we'll give you even more loans to try to pay back those loans, or we'll do debt restructuring. And the conditions kick in at that point where they say, well, here's what you have to do. All of the other sectors that you have that are currently publicly owned, you have to privatize and sell off to, and you might have guessed it, Western capitalists. So then you take away certain parts of your key sectors, like your agricultural industry or your mining industry, whatever the fucking remains that was like directly benefiting the government coffers, and you sell it off to private industry. All the while, the Western forces force you to implement austerity measures, which of course means no more welfare, no more social safety nets, no more government spending on domestic policy. And if you don't do that and you try to play this delicate balance of like continuously having social safety nets while regularly getting more and more foreign debt and racking it up, well, then you turn into Argentina. Please show us an example of this. Argentina.
Mauricio Macri, con la idea de insertar a Argentina en el mundo nuevamente, lo que hizo fue insertarla en las políticas económicas que dictaminaba el FMI. El FMI te presta plata si vos
the IMF lends you money if you accept certain types of demands,
que tenía que ver con achicamiento
such
del
as shrinking
Estado,
the state,
con
reducing
ajuste en el
spending,
bolsillo y en el
and
déficit
accepting fiscal
fiscal.
deficit
Y en ese
adjustments.
momento Argentina de estar
And at that
totalmente
time, Argentina went from being totally out of debt to taking out on a debt of $57 billion.
Ese fue el último. Hubo
And that
otros
was just one of the more
previamente,
recent ones.
del momento que
Previously, there were other
Macri
loans from the
ingresa
time when
nuevamente
Macri
al
rejoined the
FMI. Y
IMF.
obviamente volvió a tener una
And obviously, the IMF had an office in the
oficina
Argentinian
del
Central
Banco
Bank.
Central en el FMI. Es decir, monitoreaba desde la casa.
That is, the IMF was stationed in a place that governs Argentina's monetary policy. I think it's good to watch like maybe something like a short summarization of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Like there's a 9-hour audio book of this book as well from John Perkins. There's also another documentary, like a short documentary. Maybe we can watch that. That will help you develop a better understanding of how we saddle poor countries with debt and then then we exploit them. What would happen if a government refused to pay off loans like a revolutionary government? Well, there's a couple different things that can happen, but if you don't pay off the loans, you're fucked. Then you'll be shut out from the entire global marketplace. And in a country where your agricultural exports are very important, you're fucking cooked. They'll come and they'll repo your possessions that they say they've built, or they'll asset strip you. There are different ways in which this has happened in the past. Like, you can also have a democratic election where the government decides to move in that direction, or you can even have a violent revolution. You'll either go the way of Cuba if you're lucky, or the way of Venezuela if you're not lucky, especially if you do not have any opportunity to diversify your industries, like diversify your economy, and it's hyper reliant on one type of key export. In extraction. It's shit all around. Future loans are really difficult, plus other countries don't like trading with you. Capacity to take loans are the basis of a lot of trade.